There are wars that are seen, and wars that are hidden by centuries of smoke and silence. The Imperium believes itself to be the author of its own fate, a colossus built on the bones of 1,000,000 worlds, marching toward whatever brutal horizon awaits. But behind the thrum of void ship engines, behind the prayers echoing through cathedral manufactorums and fortress macroclaves, there are older hands shaping the path humanity walks. Hands that remember the stars before our species had even learned to shape fire. Hands that have manipulated empires, species, and the very currents of the immaterium long before the first imperial Aquila was ever etched into steel or stone. The Eldar do not conquer humanity in the open. They whisper into the hearts of its generals. They distort prophecy, ensure the right double-edged victory, let a world burn so another might live just long enough for their design to unfold. They do not need humanity to flourish. They simply need it to bleed in ways that serve their survival. Sometimes they appear as saviors. Sometimes they appear as angels of omen. And sometimes humanity never knows they were there at all. This is the story of shadows older than empires, weaving the destiny of a species that believes itself alone at the helm of history. The ash had been falling for 3 days, though no one was entirely certain if the sky above still contained clouds or if it was simply smoke layered upon smoke, a permanent shroud choking the world's horizon into a dim gray blur. The regiment had stopped trying to clear their visors. There was no point. The fine particulate clung to everything, working its way beneath armor seals and between teeth, a bitter mineral dust that tasted like decay and burned promethium. The world they fought to save had long since stopped looking like anything worth saving. But orders were orders, and faith was all that remained. The 117th Calastian Line Infantry held the shattered ruins of what had once been a manufactorum district, though only the blackened skeletons of superstructural frames remained now. The ground shook intermittently with artillery impacts, distant or dangerously close, and every Vox channel was bruised with static, screams, and the broken litany of commanders who no longer expected an answer when they barked instructions. The enemy was closing from the east. That much was known. The 117th did not know how many. Some said hundreds, some said thousands. Others claimed they had seen the silhouettes of titanic shapes, engines of war with no markings of the Imperium. But rumor no longer mattered, only survival. Corporal Jalen Vero leaned against a collapsed column that had once supported a transit platform, his laser gun held close, barrel resting along a stone edge darkened with old blood. He couldn't remember when he'd last spoken. The silence wasn't intentional. Words simply felt wasteful when every breath carried the weight of smoke and exhaustion. Around him, the remnants of his squad moved like ghosts. He recognized them only by the shapes of their armor, marked by soot and scoring, their features rendered unknowable by helmets and respirator masks that hid their eyes, and any lingering humanity behind them. A distant scream rippled through the air. Someone had stepped on a mine. The explosion was small, efficient, the kind the enemy favored, meant to maim, not kill. The Imperium always taught that wounded soldiers drew resources, time, morale. The enemy knew the same lesson but twisted it. No one went to help the screaming trooper. No one could. The screaming went on, then stopped. A sound like whispering wind threaded through the ruins, thin and nearly delicate, yet unmistakably intentional. Varro stiffened. He had heard it 3 times now in the past 2 days, a sound that didn't belong to the battlefield. Something watching, something choosing its moment. He told himself it was only nerves, a trick of memory trying to fill the void left by fear. But a part of him, the part that had learned to listen, to truly listen, to everything, knew better. Sergeant Ellen's voice cracked through the vox, sharp with tension. Brace positions, eastward approach, movement confirmed. There was no rallying cry, no sermon, no attempt to stir courage. They were far beyond that. The men and women of the 117th settled into position because there was nothing else to do. The ruins of the street ahead shimmered in the heat of distant fires. Shadows shifted, shapes emerged. They were not orcs, not heretics, not anything Varro recognized. Their silhouettes were slender but not frail. Their armor glimmered faintly even through the smoke, shaped like something grown rather than forged, elegant and wrong in a place defined only by brutality. Their movements were precise, coordinated, beautiful in the same way predation is beautiful when observed from a distance. The 117th did not know their name, they only knew the stories. Ghost strike raiders, knife shadows, the curse dancers of the dying stars, the Eldar. A ripple of unease moved through the Calastians. Laser guns tightened in grips. Someone whispered a prayer, voice trembling. The air between the two forces felt unreal, stretched thin. The Eldar did not rush them, they did not scream, they simply advanced, as if the outcome had already been written. Varro steadied his breathing. A stray thought flickered. Why here? Why now? Why this small, exhausted regiment instead of the command bastions or armored columns further west? Why waste their presence on soldiers already thought lost? He never had the chance to finish the thought. A single pulse of light, almost soundless, lanced through the air and struck precisely the ridgeline of the hab block above them, collapsing it into a cascading avalanche of debris. But the debris fell not upon the 117th. It crashed across the kill lane ahead, cutting off the Eldar's advance and forcing them to scatter and reevaluate. It was deliberate, it was surgical, it was help, but no one fired that shot. No one human. The war had not yet begun in truth, yet already invisible, fingers had pressed against the scales, adjusting weight, shifting outcome, deciding who lived and who did not, and none of them knew why. Varro's heartbeat echoed in his throat as he whispered, not to the Emperor, but to the dark. Who's there? The collapse's aftermath left a choking cloud of pulverized concrete and scorched plasteel drifting across the ruined avenue, obscuring the Eldar formation in a shifting haze. Varro could hear movement, light, quick, impossibly controlled footfalls weaving through debris with the quiet elegance of something that had never known clumsiness or hesitation. His own heartbeat felt clumsy by comparison, too loud in his ears, too human. The 117th adjusted firing arcs in silence, though some hands trembled. None dared voice the thought that was now shared between them all. They had been spared, not by luck, not by the Emperor's grace, by something else entirely. The vox sputtered. Sergeant Ellen hissed a command, but the static devoured half the words. The regiment spread out regardless, acting on instinct and drill, the kind instilled so deeply into muscle memory that it survived, even when reason and hope had long since faltered. The world dimmed to slow motion. The air tasted of ozone and burning insulation. Something flickered across Varro's peripheral vision. Just a shape, a ripple in the haze, as delicate as silk, yet quick as lightning. A last round fired somewhere to his right, then another, then a scream. The Eldar struck like the fall of a scalpel into exposed bone. They did not attack in a wave. They came as fragments of a broken reflection, appearing for a moment of terrible clarity before vanishing into the smoke. Varro caught a glimpse of a helm shaped like a frozen tear of obsidian, a blade that shimmered like moonlight on still water, the curve of armor that seemed more like a second skin than metal. No emotion, no fury, only focus. Varro fired on instinct, laser gun bark flashing bright in the dust, The beam struck stone, not target. The Eldar moved faster than the eye could track. A trooper beside him fell, throat opened by a stroke too swift to feel. Blood sprayed across the column Varro hid behind, steaming as it mingled with still hot debris. He ducked, breath sharp and ugly in his mask. Even fear felt cumbersome. The Eldar were not here to slaughter them, not entirely. They were testing, probing, searching for something, or someone. A memory rose unbidden. Old training hall parchment showing comparative Xenos physiology, strategic advisories, behavioral expectations. Eldar warfare doctrine, precision, misdirection, battlefield sculpting. They did not waste motion. They did not waste purpose. Why here? Why now? A flicker of movement directly ahead. A silhouette partially revealed by drifting heat shimmer. Varro steadied his aim, laser gun held flush to shoulder, control deliberate, breath measured. A shape moved behind the Eldar shape. Not human, not Eldar, something watching both. The Eldar warrior froze mid-motion. Not hesitation, recognition, or surprise. Then withdrawal, silent, swift, like ink pulled backward into water. The battlefield stilled. The scream of artillery died away, distant impacts no longer felt. Even the ever-present furnace roar of burning city blocks seemed muted, as though the world itself held breath. Varro lifted his visor just enough to wipe the grit from his brow. He wished he hadn't. At the far end of the ruined street, partially obscured by fallen metal scaffolds and drifting ash, stood a figure. Tall, slender, armored in wraithbone, shaped into flowing contours that resembled a living silhouette rather than constructed plating. A warseer, though Varro did not know the word. He felt the presence before he fully perceived the form. The figure did not move, did not attack, did not command. It simply watched him, watched them. Something cold flickered beneath Varro's ribs. Not fear, not awe. A strange recognition, as if some forgotten dream brushed his thoughts. Shapes of light and memory danced behind his eyelids in brief flashes. Constellations rearranging, a city of impossible towers gleaming beneath a sky of starlight older than Terra itself. Voices singing in languages humanity had never learned but somehow nearly understood. He blinked hard, the visions faded. The warseer lifted a hand. Slowly, deliberately, not in threat, in acknowledgement. A choice had been made here long before any human soldier set foot on this dying world, and Varro was part of it. Before he could speak, before he could even breathe to steady himself, the warseer lowered its hand and stepped backward. The moment fractured, the air shimmered, and the figure vanished into a thin seam of light that faded like a dying ember. The remaining Eldar shapes withdrew with it, movements synchronized, silent, final. The battlefield belonged once more to the dying, choking, exhausted human regiment who had no idea what they had just survived, or why. Sergeant Ellen's voice finally broke through the vox again, hoarse and disbelieving. They're gone. But Varro was not looking at where they had vanished. He was staring at the place where an impossible presence had stood, and where the shape behind it, the figure neither Eldar nor human, had first been seen. Something else was choosing the shape of this war. Something hidden within the hidden. Varro whispered again, softer this time, and not entirely sure whom he was asking. Why me? Continue. If you listen closely to the quiet parts, to the space between the wars and the aftermath of victories that feel suspiciously hollow, patterns begin to show themselves. If you wish to continue walking these corridors of hidden intent and ancient memory with me, stay here. Like, share, and subscribe so that this exploration does not end here but continues deeper. Beyond the veil humanity was never meant to see behind. The regiment did not celebrate their survival. There was no cheer, no lifting of spirits, no shared relief. They simply continued breathing, and that was enough to feel like defiance on a world that had forgotten mercy. The ruins were quiet now, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. The kind that waits, that observes, that learns. The Eldar had not been defeated. They had withdrawn, and that was always worse. Sergeant Ellen moved among the survivors, his boots crunching through shattered masonry and brittle, half-burned paper that disintegrated underfoot. His armor was cracked at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood ran from beneath his helmet seal, but he seemed unaware of it. He stopped in front of Varro and stared at him through the darkened visor, saying nothing for a long time. The silence was heavy, as though a question hung between them that neither wanted to ask. "You saw something," Ellen finally rasped, voice grainy like gravel dragged across steel. Varro did not nod. He did not speak, but the answer was in the way his fingers clenched around his lasgun grip, knuckles paling under the gauntlet. Ellen exhaled slowly, a tired, low sound. "Keep it to yourself. The others don't need more ghosts." Varro wanted to argue that it hadn't been a ghost, that it had been solid, real, undeniable, but the words would not come, and perhaps Ellen was right. In this place, even truth could kill. Especially truth. They regrouped what was left of the 117th, fewer than half of the number that had held these ruins the day before. Some carried wounds that would fester. Some carried wounds that did not bleed but would never close. And Varro carried something that felt like a thread pulling at him from somewhere far beyond this world. The regiment began to move westward, toward the fallback line along the canal trench. The sky above burned in dull orange and sickly green, where atmosphere ignited under munitions detonating in the upper layers. The ground trembled now and then, distant macro shells falling like slow thunder. But the mood had shifted. Not to hope. Something stranger than hope. A question, deep and quiet and growing. Why had the Eldar left them alive? The canal trench cut like a scar through the Manufactorum district, a long wound of collapsed ferrocrete walls and stagnant oily water reflecting the firelight. Defensive platforms had been erected there weeks ago, when Command still believed the city could be held. The platforms were abandoned now. Vox logs said the unit stationed here had been redeployed, though everyone knew the truth. No redeploy orders had come through intact channels in days. The soldiers here had died. The regiment simply did not want to look closely enough to confirm it. The 117th descended into the trench. The air changed here, cooler. Still full of ash, but quieter somehow, as though this place remembered stillness. Varro glanced upward at the ruined skyline. It felt wrong, like the world was waiting. He sensed it before he heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not mechanical, not hostile, organic, purposeful. Someone stood at the far bend of the trench walkway. Varro raised his weapon. Ellen followed. The others froze. The figure was human, or mostly human. They wore flak armor that had once been Imperial issue, though it had been modified, reshaped, decorated with symbols that did not belong to any regiment Varro knew. The armor was painted with swirling patterns of deep violet and bone white, looping arcs that felt like constellations glimpsed in motion. The figure's helmet had no visor, only a smooth faceplate of polished ceramic, featureless and pale, reflecting the firelight of the sky like a still pool. The figure did not speak, did not move. The tapping came from the end of a staff they held, its base gently striking the ferrocrete with the weight of deliberate attention. Not a weapon, a signal. Varro felt his breath catch. He had seen this shape, not clearly, not in waking sight, but behind the Warseer, in that shimmer of something else. The presence watching both sides, the presence that did not belong to either. The figure tilted its head, ever so slightly, as though studying him in return. Sergeant Ellen's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Identify yourself." The figure did not respond. Instead, it lifted its free hand, slowly, like someone soothing a frightened animal. Behind them, distant shapes moved. Not Eldar, not human. Something in between, or neither. Steps light and soundless on stone. Varro's heart beat once, twice, slower. The figure's hand remained raised. Not threat, invitation, or instruction. Something was about to happen. The air thickened, like pressure building before a storm. Varro did not know why, but he understood this moment mattered. As though his life had been drawn to this single point like a pin to a needle's tip. His finger hovered over the trigger. The figure's voice, when it finally came, was soft. Not heard through the ears, but behind them. "Do not fear what you were meant to become." Varro froze. No one else reacted. They hadn't heard a thing. His life bent in that instant, subtle as a breath, irreversible as a wound. Varro's hands felt suddenly weightless, as if the laser gun had become an object belonging to a different life entirely. The world around him continued in motion, though it no longer felt synchronized with his own heartbeat. Sergeant Ellen was still shouting orders. Soldiers were shifting into firing positions. Someone was cursing under their breath, the kind of desperate muttering meant to summon courage through sheer noise. Yet all of it passed through Varro like echoes heard underwater. The figure in the violet-marked armor did not step forward. It simply remained there, poised with the patience of something that had experienced time on a scale far beyond the short, burning lives of mortal men. The tapping of the staff had stopped. The silence it left behind felt almost surgical, cutting cleanly through panic and disbelief. A soldier to Varro's left, Trooper Ress, raised her rifle and fired. A single last bolt seared through the air, red light streaking toward the figure. For the briefest instant, Varro believed he would watch it strike, burn, and end whatever impossible moment had begun here. Instead, the bolt simply missed. Not in the way a shot is deflected or dodged. It drifted. Its path bent a fraction of a hair's width, glancing off the stone of the trench wall as though the air itself had shifted to deny the violence. Ress stared in disbelief. She had never missed at that distance. Not once. The masked figure turned its faceplate toward her, the smooth surface reflecting no features, only the war-torn world around them. No threat, no anger, merely observation. Ellen didn't hesitate this time. His command voice returned in full, ragged force. "Open fire!" Laser guns snapped into chorus, the air crackling with unison heat. Dozens of bolts converged on the trench bend, turning the world into streaks of burning crimson. But none found their mark. The figure was no longer there. It had not leapt. It had not vanished in a burst of light. It had simply shifted position, with a motion so fluid and unbroken that it seemed like the world had blinked rather than the figure had moved. It now stood several meters closer, as though time had folded between one heartbeat and the next. Ellen swore, voice cracking with something dangerously close to fear. Then the others appeared. Not many, 6, perhaps 7. Their forms were tall and lithe, their movements impossible to track directly. Their armor resembled that of aspect warriors, but not of any known shrine. The silhouettes suggested echoes of harlequins without their flamboyance, quiet instead of theatrical. Their weapons remained sheathed. They held no rifles, no blades drawn. They approached with the surety of those for whom violence is neither guess nor gamble, but certainty. A shadow warband. a wandering hand of the Eldar's labyrinthine paths. And the masked figure leading them was something older still. The regiment's firing faltered, not from discipline, from dread. Varro felt the pressure behind his thoughts again, a gentle push, like someone placing a hand on his shoulder rather than forcing it. His breath caught. His heart slowed. The figure turned its blank, polished face toward him. "You are not chosen." The thought formed in words that were not words. "You are aligned." Varro stumbled back a step, gasping. The air returned to his lungs in a sharp, ragged surge, like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Ellen barked, "Fall back, defensive posture, regroup at tier wall." But even as the order rang out, the masked figure lowered its staff, and the Eldar warriors stopped advancing. They did not pursue. They were not here to kill. They had come to look, to verify, to confirm the thread they had woven still held. The masked figure gave a single, slow inclination of the head, directed only at Varro. Not the regiment, not Ellen. Him. Then, as smoothly as a breeze changing direction, the Eldar withdrew. The way they moved defied the brutality of the battlefield. They traversed rubble and ruin as though stepping across memory instead of matter. Within moments, the trench bend was empty again, as though they had never existed. Yet the silence they left behind weighed heavier than their presence. Ellen approached Varro, and for the first time since the siege began, Varro saw something break through the sergeant's stoic armor. Fear that did not come from the enemy but from uncertainty. "What did you see?" Ellen demanded, voice low, hoarse, intimate. Varro searched for words. He found none that were safe. So he offered the only truth that didn't shatter something vital. "They weren't here for us." Ellen stared at him for a long, hollow moment. "Then Emperor help us," he whispered, "because that means we're already part of something we don't understand." The ash continued to fall, silent, steady, unending. The world did not pause for revelation. It simply demanded the next breath, the next step, the next choice. And something unseen continued to watch. Night did not fall on this world so much as fade into a deeper, ash-blackened dimness. The smoke had grown thicker, obscuring even the dull burn of the battle fires beyond the horizon. The regiment moved without lights, without chatter, without the small sound soldiers make when trying to convince themselves they are still alive. Silence had become their new discipline. Even the wounded did their best to contain their pain behind clenched teeth, muffled breath, or prayer mouthed without voice. The masked figure's presence lingered in Varro's thoughts like a bruise he could not stop pressing. Not an Eldar, not entirely, or not in the way the others were. Something adjacent to them, tethered to their purpose but not bound to their grief. He had no name for such a thing. The Skolam had not prepared him for concepts that did not fit on identification charts or lexicon primers. It had taken only a single moment to rearrange everything he thought he understood about his place in the galaxy. The regiment reached a collapsed transit causeway, its skeletal supports rising like the ribs of a giant creature long since stripped to bone. They set up a temporary perimeter beneath the shattered overpass, sheltered from artillery view and shielded from aerial drones by the tangled metal overhead. It was not safety. There was no safety here, but it was less death than the open street, and that counted for something. Varro sat near the back of the formation, visor removed, respirator hanging loose around his throat. The air still tasted of chemical ash and scorched metal, but he relished the simple act of breathing without filters, even if each breath carried the risk of slow internal rot. He watched the others settle, some cleaning weapons that no longer needed cleaning, some staring into nothing, some sleeping with eyes half open. War reduced everyone to habits meant to keep the mind from fracturing. He did not realize Ellen had approached until the sergeant lowered himself to sit beside him. The motion was careful, slow, not from injury, but from caution. "You're not going to sleep," Ellen said quietly. Varro shook his head. "I know," Ellen murmured. "I wouldn't either." They sat in silence for a long while. The war raged in the distance, muffled, like memory rather than reality. Varro had the strange sensation that the world was holding itself in place, waiting for something to arrive that had not yet stepped into time. "Years ago," Ellen said softly, "I fought in the Ansira corridor. Thought I understood the Eldar then. They cut us apart, efficient, beautiful, horrifying." He paused. "But they never hesitated. They never stopped to look at us. Not like that, not like today." Varro's jaw tightened. "They weren't looking at us." Ellen nodded slowly. "No, they were looking at you." The truth of it hung between them, heavy, dangerous, undeniable. "You're going to attract the wrong kind of attention if you don't learn to hide it," Ellen said, his voice not unkind. "Command will see you as a liability. Some will see you as touched. The Munitorum priests will call it corruption. And if word spreads further," he exhaled, "the Inquisition does not leave questions unanswered." Varro felt something cold ripple through him. Not fear for himself, fear for the people around him, the regiment, these men and women who had stood beside him while the sky burned and the world died. They did not deserve to be drawn into whatever thread had coiled around his life. "What do I do?" Varro asked. Ellen looked at him, visor off now. His eyes lined with exhaustion and something older. "You keep walking. You keep breathing. You keep your head down, and you pray the thing that's watching you wants you alive more than it wants you gone." There was no comfort in the words, only honesty. The sky rumbled. A distant detonation traced across the horizon like lightning behind storm clouds. The ruins glowed faint red in response, as if remembering fire. Varro lifted his gaze toward the smothered stars, though he could not see them. Something was out there, not waiting, not hunting, guiding. And whether he wanted it or not, his life was no longer entirely his own. The unseen hand had touched him, and it was not finished. The skein shimmered before her like mist threaded with constellations, each strand of possibility glimmering with its own terrible consequence. Every warseer learned to see the future not as a path, but as a storm of intersecting fates, a great tapestry in perpetual motion, shifting with each heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Yet, for Elthera of Craftworld Lumthar, the sight had become something far more personal. The threads she studied now were not entire wars or civilizations, but the fragile, flickering soul of a single human whose life had become a point of violent inflection. She had seen such nodes before, individuals whose choices could alter far more than their own survival. A guardsman surviving a battle he should have died in. A general hesitating 1 second longer than expected. A child who would grow to lead a rebellion that changes nothing and everything. The skein was not shaped by destiny as mortals imagined it, but by the weight of decisions no one recognized as important until long after they were made. But there was something different about Varro, not chosen, not special, not blessed, aligned. His existence was like a stone dropped into a still pool, sending ripples into places Elthera had spent centuries trying to keep still. The chamber she occupied was quiet, a sanctuary of carved wraithbone lit by steady, pulsing ether lamps that glimmered like starlight caught in crystal. The runes suspended before her rotated slowly, forming and dissolving complex patterns as they mirrored the skein's shifting tides. Some Eldar found comfort in the dance of these omens, the sense of cosmic order playing out in delicate, inscrutable mathematics. Elthara found only exhaustion. Her body was still young by the reckoning of lesser races, light and swift and graceful. But age in the craft worlds was not measured in years, it was measured in memory, and her memories were heavy things. Songs sung in crystal amphitheaters that no longer existed. Laughter shared with those long since consumed by She Who Thirsts. Cities of impossible beauty that were now ash scattered across the void. She blinked once, long and slow, and allowed her consciousness to lean deeper into the skein. Futures unfurled like petals. Worlds burning, worlds saved, worlds devoured by the green tide of endless hunger. Humanity rising into its own monstrous glory, or collapsing beneath its own fervor. The Astartes, the Astra Militarum, the Mechanicus, all of them mattered, vast forces acting upon one another like colliding stars, yet Vero was a hinge, small, quiet, nearly invisible. Because sometimes a fortress falls not when its walls crumble, but when a single stone shifts out of place. She had intervened twice now, subtly, carefully. Her warband had followed without question. But she had felt the strain. Every interference pulled the skein in unnatural ways, tugging fate into patterns that resisted her hand. If she pulled too hard, if she forced too much, something would snap. And the last time something snapped in the skein, a god had died. She opened her eyes. The chamber was still. Her breath was steady, but her pulse felt uneven. A soft voice came from behind her, melodic yet weighted by concern. "You have been here for many cycles, Elthara." She did not turn. She recognized the voice. Alien, a fellow seer, one who had once been her closest companion when the galaxy seemed less fragile. His presence felt like an old memory, warm, and yet touched by sorrow. "This thread you follow," Alien continued, stepping closer. "It draws you, consumes you. I feel its pull as well, a dangerous heaviness. You risk too much of yourself." Elthara's tone was quiet but not cold. "If I do nothing, the futures that remain converge into ruin, not in one place, not in one war, everywhere, at once." Alien exhaled slowly. "There have always been ruins. Not like this." The runes flickered. One dimmed. Another flared. A branching future closed. Alien watched, and then, after a long moment, he asked the question neither wished to speak aloud. "And the human? Does he know?" Elthara finally turned, her eyes distant. Ancient, not in age, but in weight. "No," she said, "and he must not." Alien nodded, though his expression shifted, the faintest shadow of doubt, of fear, or perhaps grief for her. "The skein marks him," Elthara whispered. "But he must believe he walks by his own steps. If he learns otherwise, all futures collapse into blood." Alien's reply was almost a lament. "Then we will guide him from the shadows, and pray the strands hold." Elthara looked back to the runes, and for a moment the threads flickered like candlelight in a storm. She could feel it. Something else was watching the skein. Something not Eldar. Something patient, something hungry. Elthara did not sleep when her work with the skein was done. Sleep was a crude, blunt refuge, a slipping away that denied one the subtle murmurs of the warp's currents. Instead, she rested standing, palms against the cool wraithbone walls of the chamber, letting the craft world's own pulse resonate through her marrow. The living structure hummed gently beneath her touch, a thrum like a heartbeat that was not hers alone. The craft world remembered every footfall, every death, every whisper of joy or despair that had graced its halls. To be Eldar was to carry not just one's own memory, but the echoes of countless others layered like starlight within glass. Footsteps approached again, lighter this time, not hesitant but reverent. Elthara did not need to turn to know who it was. The Harlequin's presence was unmistakable, a breeze that seemed to change the temperature of the air merely by existing. The mask moved like a poem written before language, each step graceful, not because it was practiced, but because movement itself was a sacred act to them. The figure came to stand at her side. They were taller than she remembered, though perhaps that was only her own fatigue making the world seem larger. Their mask was painted in serene neutrality, a face without expression but carrying infinite suggestion. A single harlequin tear was etched beneath one eye in shimmering silver, catching faint light in delicate glints. "Elthara of Lumathar," the harlequin murmured, voice light yet threaded with meaning. "You walk dangerous threads." Elthara did not turn. "Then you already know why." The harlequin gave a sound halfway between laughter and sorrow. "Oh, we know many things. The laughing god shows us the shape of folly, tragedy, victory, and irony all at once. The joke has already been written, and yet we perform it anew every cycle. Yours is a familiar act." Elthara's jaw tightened. "This is not performance." "All things are performance," the harlequin replied. "We merely disagree on who the audience is." A pulse flickered across the skein, subtle, like a faint tremor through woven fabric. Varro's thread shifted, not by force, by choice. Something in him struggled, reached, questioned. His alignment was not fixed, not stable. Fate was mutable, yes, but when a fragile thread wavered, the strain it placed on the web was catastrophic. Elthara turned to face the harlequin fully now, gaze sharp, voice low. "Tell me why you are here." The harlequin's mask reflected her image. Tired, resolute, afraid in ways she could not voice. "To warn you," the harlequin said softly. "The laughing god speaks of a shadow behind the shadow. The skein you follow is not solely woven by our kind. Another hand moves, something ancient, or something newborn. It is difficult to tell the difference when measured in stellar epochs rather than mortal time." Elthara felt her pulse falter. "Chaos?" "No," the harlequin said, and the denial was immediate, certain. "Chaos is loud, crude, clumsy. This is quiet, patient, careful. It does not seize strands, it brushes them, guides them, like a musician tuning an instrument already being played." Elthara's breath tightened. The figure she had sensed behind Varro, the shape that lingered at the edge of vision, the soft presence that watched without revealing itself, was not an illusion of strained foresight. It was real, and it was not Eldar. The harlequin lowered their voice further, the tone shifting from theatrical cadence to something intimate. "You seek to save what remains, to preserve what we are, to stave off despair with precision and sacrifice, and for this we honor you. But remember this, Elthara. Even the most careful guiding hand can be mistaken for chains by those who do not understand why they are led." Elthara closed her eyes. Varro could not know. Varro must not know. If he realized he was being shaped, the thread would snap. "If I release him," she whispered, "the skein collapses into ruin." "And if you hold him too tightly," the harlequin replied, "you will become the ruin." Silence settled between them. Two beings ancient by human measure, yet dwarfed by time itself. The harlequin stepped backward, movements impossibly fluid, cloak fluttering like ink dispersing in water. As they faded into the corridor beyond, their voice drifted back. "Pray that the human walks true, for if he falters, both our peoples bleed." Elthara remained alone in the chamber. The skein rippled. A single thread glowed with painful clarity. Varro's next decision would reshape everything, and she could no longer intervene directly. The burden was no longer just hers. It was his. Elthara left the skyne chamber in silence, her footfalls whispering across the wraithbone floor. The craft world corridors stretched long and graceful, grown rather than built, illuminated by soft bioluminescent veins running through the structure like living starlight. Every passage remembered, every curve held memory. When Eldar died, their spirits were drawn into the infinity circuit, and the craft world carried them forever. The living walked through the presence of the dead as naturally as humans breathed air. But tonight, even the craft world felt restless. The hum beneath her feet was uneven. The resonance of the infinity circuit pulsed with subtle disquiet. Spirits murmured in shifting currents, not with words but sensations, pressure, anticipation, distant mourning. They had felt the disturbance in the skein as clearly as she had. The wraithbone vibrated faintly, the way a taut string sings when touched. Elthara paused where the corridor opened into a wide domed hall lined with statues, tall, elegant figures carved from shimmering crystal. These were not monuments to glory, but to loss. Farseers, bone singers, exarchs, warlocks, those consumed by their paths or taken by she who thirsts. The Eldar did not honor the dead with triumph, but with remembrance. The tragedy was the legacy. She closed her eyes, letting the stillness settle around her like a cloak. She had walked the path of the seer for centuries, long enough that even names she once held dear had faded into echoes. Time for the Eldar was not a linear march, but a loop of memories folding upon themselves. She remembered battles fought in the void seas between stars. She remembered dances of light across crystal domes. She remembered laughter, and she remembered the day laughter died. The screams, when Slaanesh was born, were not something historians recorded. They were carried in soulstone and marrow. They were the reason every Eldar stepped carefully, deliberately, with fear coiled at the edges of desire. They had built their civilization from perfection and indulgence, and had watched it devour them whole. Perhaps that was why Elthara was so tired. She had witnessed her people survive the end of everything once. She knew how close they still stood to being erased from the galaxy forever. She could not allow it to happen again. A soft presence entered the hall behind her. No sound announced it, but she felt it the way one feels a shift in gravity or temperature. Elthara knew this presence, though she had spent years trying not to. "I wondered when you would find me," she said quietly. The footsteps that followed were softer than any humans, clear and measured. The one who approached stopped beside her, the familiar shape of an autarch, armor adorned with runes of command, helm shaped in sweeping arcs that mirrored the wings of a swift. The armor was ceremonial yet battle-worn, polished yet scarred. The warrior removed their helm with a practiced motion. Alien's face was unchanged, Eldar beauty carved in delicate sharpness, eyes bright as cold fire. But there was grief there too, the deep and abiding kind that no number of centuries could dull. "You were always here," he said softly. "You never left this hall." She knew what he meant. Memory had trapped her long before foresight did. "Elthara," he continued, "the Council grows uneasy. They know you have been intervening beyond the acceptable threshold. They feel the strain you place on the skein. They will demand explanation soon." "I know." His expression tightened. "And what will you tell them? That a single human guardsman now carries the hope of a craft world? They will call you mad." Elthara's eyes lifted toward the crystal statues. "Then they have forgotten what madness truly is." Alien stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I do not question your sight, but the Harlequin spoke to me as well. This thread does not move alone. There is something else shaping it, something not ours. We do not know its purpose. We do not know if it aids us or consumes us. Elthara's response was almost a whisper. Does purpose matter if the outcome is survival? Yes, Alien said, and the word was painful, because we have survived before, and each time we do, we become something smaller to remain alive. At what point does survival cost more than death? She closed her eyes. The truth burned. Varro's thread was not salvation. It was gamble, and she had wagered her craft world's future. We move forward because we must, Elthara said. The skein narrows. We have no path that does not bleed, but there is one path that bleeds less, and that path is Varro. Yes. Alien bowed his head, accepting, not agreement, but inevitability. The craft world dimmed as though clouds had passed before a sun that was not there. Far away, light years distant, Varro took his next breath. The skein trembled. The future shifted, and the burden deepened. Elthara walked from the Hall of Echoes with the heaviness of old memory pressing against her spine, the air of the craft world changing subtly around her as she approached the inner transit ways. The wraithbone beneath her feet resonated with subdued discord, like a harp string slightly out of tune. The infinity circuit did not scream, not yet, but there was strain, tension running through it like the breath before a cry. The life aboard a craft world was never still. Even in quiet cycles, its people moved with purpose. Artisans shaped wraithbone into living form. Bone singers coaxed music from structure. Artisans and poets tried to hold on to fragments of beauty in a galaxy that punished beauty without mercy. And yet today, the halls felt muted. The seers had seen the same fracture she had. They had felt the ripple. They did not yet speak of it, but silence in the craft world was never emptiness. It was collective thought held in restraint. As Elthara approached the observation amphitheater, the translucent canopy opened to the void. Stars drifted in endless cascade, cold and serene. The craft world glided through the stars like a wounded swan, regal but tired, its runic thrusters glowing pale lavender against the void. The nebula ahead glimmered in rich violet and faint emerald, forming veils of light across the canopy's curvature. It would have been beautiful had Elthara not seen the same nebula burning in a dozen futures. 4 other seers were there, robes trailing like falling petals, their postures rigid, their gazes fixed on the stars. They did not speak at her approach. They did not need to. One of them, Seer Varana, spoke at last. Her voice smooth as glass but carrying a sharp underlying fracture. So, it is true. You have intervened again. Elthara did not waste breath denying it. Yes. Varana's hands tightened where they were folded before her. How many threads have you pulled? How many futures have already shifted? Enough to delay catastrophe, Elthara answered. Not enough to stop it. A ripple passed through the group, fear, frustration, weary understanding. Seer Althine, the oldest among them, stepped forward. His hair hung silver and fine, his eyes deep with millennia of contemplation. There were Eldar older than him, but few who had held to the path of the seer this long and remained whole. "Show us," Althane said. Elthara extended her hand, and the amphitheater's prismatic projection field shimmered to life. The skein unfolded in faint strands of light, delicate and volatile. Paths branched, collapsed, reformed. The seers inhaled sharply as they saw the fracture point. Not some war front, not a throne world, not a lost Eldar craft forgotten in the void. A single human life. "You see the absurdity," Varana whispered. "The danger. A single guardsman, mortal, fragile, insignificant. You risk the stability of our craft world for a being who will die in decades if not days. Yes, Elthara said. The others stared at her. And yet, she continued, remove him, and the skein collapses into outcomes none of us survive. The projection shifted. Branching futures flared in sequence. Craft worlds burning, the webway buckling under pressure of demonic infiltration. Planets falling not through conquest, but cascading instability of power. The visions were terrible, but not grandiose. They were small horrors accumulating into extinction. It is not the soldier, Elthara said. It is the echo of his choices, what he will become, whom he will reach, what he will alter merely by surviving. Then why do we feel another presence in the skein? Althane murmured. A hand not ours, a mind not of the warp, nor of she who thirsts. Elthara's silence was answer enough. Verana's voice sharpened. You have felt it as well. Elthara nodded, watching, not intervening, guiding the smallest of currents. A presence without signature, without hunger, without form. She paused, as if it waits to see which way the branch bends and will act only then. The seers absorbed that with mounting dread. Could it be one of the old ones? Althane asked, barely above breath. No, Elthara said. What remains of them would not be so quiet. A shard of Ennead's awakening? Perhaps. Or perhaps something that has been here longer than we have had names for gods. The void outside flickered, stars shimmering as though seen through heat. Something enormous, conceptual, not physical, shifted beyond perception. All the seers felt it, a tremor in the skein, a breath drawn by something that did not need to breathe. Elthara closed the projection. Whatever watched Vero had noticed her watching back. The seers looked to her, not for comfort, but direction. What now? Althine whispered. Elthara spoke with calm she did not feel. Now, she said, we trust that the mortal chooses true. Elthara remained in the amphitheater long after the others had gone. The stars outside continued their slow, eternal drift, unconcerned with the agony of mortal and immortal minds alike. Eternity was indifferent. The galaxy had never cared whether the Eldar lived or died. Their tragedy was that they remembered when it once did. She leaned her palms against the wraithbone railing, letting its pulse resonate through her hands and up her arms. The craft world lived, and it was afraid. Not of war. War was an old companion. Not of humanity. Humanity was fire, reckless, consuming, unpredictable, but also brief. No, what the craft world feared was change. True, irrevocable, foundational change, the kind that rewrote the stars, the kind that always came with a price. Her breath trembled once. Not enough to be audible, but enough that the infinity circuit felt it, and its pulse steadied in reply. The dead comforted the living, not with words but with presence. The Eldar had crafted immortality, but not peace. She closed her fingers slowly, deliberately, as if gripping something she could not dare to let fall. Vero was not chosen. He was not fated. His thread had not been woven for him. That was what terrified her most. His life was an unanchored point in the skein, movable, flexible, indeterminate. He could become salvation. He could become ruin. There was no prophecy that narrowed his path. No god whispering in his ear. His choices were truly his own, and that made him dangerous. She left the observation hall without speaking again. The air in the corridors felt heavier now, as if the craft world itself wanted to draw close, wanting reassurance she did not have to give. There were no answers she could offer, only watchfulness, only faith. The thought struck her like a blade of irony. Eldar did not speak of faith. Faith was a human word, a human weapon, a human disease. Eldar had sight, knowledge, discipline. They trusted only in what could be traced, matched, measured, understood. But now, she was asking her people to trust the unknowable. Perhaps that was why she was afraid. She returned to her private chamber, its walls curved like the petals of a flower held in still bloom. A single wraithbone shrine stood at the center, carved with runes not of power, but remembrance. The soul stone embedded there pulsed faintly, soft, warm, familiar, her mother's stone, a seer who had died fighting the same inevitability Elthara now faced. She placed her hand against the stone. Warmth met her skin, not metaphorical, real. The infinity circuit pulsed through it. Her mother's presence was not voice or memory, but a feeling, the way sunlight feels through closed eyelids after a long night, the way music sounds when remembered rather than heard. Elthara exhaled, and the truth that had followed her for centuries found shape again. The Eldar had survived only because they refused to surrender. They had lost gods, worlds, empires, stars, and still they walked. But this path was narrower than any before. "Watch him," she whispered to the Soulstone. "Guide him if you can, but do not touch him. If he feels the hand, he will pull away." The Soulstone pulsed once, soft as a sigh. Elthara withdrew. There was nothing more to do now. The skein had been shaped as far as she dared shape it. The next movement, the next breath, the next wound or revelation belonged to Vero. Far across the void, on the dying world where ash fell in place of snow, and the sky burned without flame, Vero slept beneath the ruined transit causeway. His dreams were not dreams, but memories rethreaded. The masked figure, the silent hand, raised not in threat but in recognition. The warseer whose gaze had reached into him without touch. He woke with a start, breath uneven, heart hammering. The world around him was dark, but not silent. Something had shifted, not outside, inside. He did not know the word for it. But somewhere, far away in the labyrinth of webway and fate, Elthara felt the thread move. The burden had passed. The next chapter of the skein was no longer hers to guide. It belonged to him. Dawn did not break. It merely arrived as a thinning of the darkness, a gray pallor that settled across the ruins like the world itself had grown tired of struggling to see. The fires had burned low in the night, leaving only smoldering heaps and faint embers drifting on the breeze like dying stars. The 117th roused themselves slowly, not from rest. There was no rest on this world, but from the weight of exhaustion that allowed the mind to turn off just long enough to survive another cycle. Vero sat upright before he remembered opening his eyes. His heart was already beating fast, breath shallow, fingers curled tight as if gripping something unseen. The dream had not been a dream. Elthara had not appeared to him. He did not know her name, did not know she existed, but the presence remained, like a warmth that was neither comforting nor frightening, simply there, woven under the skin. The masked figure lingered in memory. The staff, the voice that was not voice, the words that should have felt alien but had instead felt intimate. "Do not fear what you were meant to become." He rubbed his hands over his face, only realizing midway that his gloves were still on. The ash clung to everything. Even the air felt dirty, like breathing through old cloth. Around him, the regiment prepared for movement. Ammunition was redistributed. Bandages tightened. A few whispered prayers. No one spoke of the previous day. Silence had become a shield. Sergeant Ellen strode through the column, his voice low but steady as he issued orders. "We move north. Canal route is compromised. Command wants us to regroup with the 401st Armored. We stay tight. Do not break formation. We do not run. We do not linger." The soldiers nodded. They did not salute. They did not have the strength for ceremony. Varro rose with the others. His legs protested. His back felt like it had been hammered, but something in him moved more easily than before. There was a stillness at the core of him now, faint but undeniable, like he had been holding tension his entire life without knowing it, and some hidden knot had begun to loosen. He did not understand it, he did not trust it, but it was there. The regiment began its march through the skeletal remains of hab blocks and gutted manufactorums. Glass crunched underfoot. Doors hung from their frames like broken limbs. A toppled statue, once bearing the likeness of a governor or saint, now lay in shattered fragments across a plaza stained black by fire. Varro found himself studying the pieces, not with sentiment but with curiosity. Even broken things told stories. Even ruins remembered who built them. As they passed beneath a bent transit archway, a low rumble echoed through the sky. The soldiers froze, instinctive, eyes turning upward. But it was distant, too high to be artillery or atmospheric engines. A storm? No. Storms did not make the ground tremble in response. Ellen grimaced. Titan engagement, they're close. The word Titan moved through the regiment like an electric current. Hope and dread in equal measure. The might of the Imperium, yes, but also a beacon for every enemy within kilometers. The 117th did not want to be anywhere near the battlefield where god machines strode. They moved faster now. Varro kept his eyes forward, until something flickered across the periphery of his vision. A ripple, a distortion, like heat haze without heat. He stopped, breath caught, pulse rising. Not again, not now. But when he turned, there was nothing. Only a half-collapsed corridor lit by pale dawn light, dust drifting like slow snow. He exhaled, except something glinted at his feet. Small, metallic, out of place in the rubble. He crouched, fingers brushing away ash. A blade, no larger than the length of his palm, crafted of a material that was neither steel nor ceramic nor anything he recognized. The surface shimmered subtly, like starlight reflected through clear water. No insignia, no markings, nothing to suggest a manufacturer or origin, but the shape was unmistakable. It was Eldar. He stared at it, pulse steadying into something deep and resonant. This was no trophy, no cast-off, no battlefield debris. It had been placed, deliberately, quietly, only for him. Ellen's voice reached him, distant but urgent. "Varro, move." Varro closed his fingers around the blade. It was light, too light, yet strong, balanced, perfect. He slipped it into his belt, hidden beneath his flak plating. Something in the world shifted then, not outside, but inside him. As though a door had been opened, and something that had always been waiting simply stepped across the threshold. He rose. "I'm coming," he said, and his voice did not tremble. The march continued, but now Varro felt eyes on him, not hostile, not guiding, simply observing. A presence that did not command, did not push, did not claim, only watched. The blade at his side felt neither gift nor burden, only promise. The regiment advanced through the crumbling arteries of the city, their boots moving in unison, more from habit than discipline. The ground here was uneven, buckled by bombardments and split by roots of ruptured infrastructure. Pipes jutted from the earth like the ribs of something ancient and long buried. The air smelled of burnt chemical propellant and dust, wet with morning dew that would never again taste like rain. Varro walked near the center of the formation, the Eldar blade resting against his side with an impossible lightness, as though it weighed nothing, yet occupied a gravity of its own. He could feel it when he breathed. not as a presence, as a reminder. A question with no phrasing yet. Not whether he should use it, but when. He said nothing of it. Ellen walked ahead, checking sightlines, mapping fallback points that would likely never be reached. Ress and Cole whispered quietly to each other 2 rows back, their voices thin and frayed. None looked at Varro long. They were too tired, too consumed by survival to notice the small shift in the air around him. But one did. A figure moving silently along the outer flank of the formation, the medic Isel. Her steps were light, her eyes sharp in a way nothing about this dying world had been able to dull. She had always seen more than she spoke. Her gaze flicked to Varro more than once, not with suspicion but with something softer, almost questioning, as though she knew something had changed without knowing what. Varro did not meet her eyes. If he did, he feared she would see everything. The regiment halted at the remains of a transit rail station. What had once been a central hub of civilian movement was now an exposed bowl of shattered ferrocrete platforms and twisted rail lines. The stillness here was wrong. Too open, too quiet. A place where echoes should have lingered, but didn't. Ellen gestured for a low formation, signaling recon scouts forward. The scouts vanished over the platform's edge. The regiment waited. Varro felt the silence growing thicker with every second that passed. He felt watched again, not by the blade's giver, but by the world itself. The air shifted, a faint pressure on the eardrums, a low vibration in the metal beneath their boots. Ress whispered, "Something's coming." It arrived in the next breath. A shadow passed overhead, not the broad mass of a bomber or thunderhawk, but something long, thin, angular. A shape like a crescent of dark glass cutting across the sky with soundless grace. Eldar, not the warband from before. A different kind of presence entirely. A hunter. The crescent shape banked once, the faintest shimmer of pale blue contrails forming behind it, then vanished behind the ruins. The ground troops didn't fire, they didn't breathe. They simply waited, each heartbeat loud enough to feel in the teeth. Then, figures appeared on the station's far platform, 5 of them. Their armor was not the flowing wraithbone elegance Varro had seen before. It was sharper, darker, a predatory curvature to its plates. Their helmets bore elongated crests, their movements synchronized, poised. They were not scouts, not diplomats, not wandering war actors. These were striking scorpions, assassins. Their presence was a blade in the air. Isel's hand brushed Varro's arm, not gripping, just grounding. Her voice was barely breath. "Varro, don't." He had not realized he had reached for the Eldar blade. The striking scorpions did not advance. They simply watched the regiment with the patience of predators certain of victory. Ellen signaled quietly to hold fire. He understood. Everyone understood. A fight here was suicide. The lead scorpion tilted its head, the movement slow, deliberate, evaluating, searching. It swept its gaze across the regiment, across Ellen, across Ress, across Kale. Then it stopped on Varro. There was no recognition in the gesture, no familiarity, only assessment, cataloging, confirming. And then, a subtle shift of stance, not hostile, not welcoming, acknowledging. Varro felt the breath leave his lungs. The scorpion leader lifted 2 fingers, precise, small, impossible to misinterpret. "Come." Ellen stepped forward instantly, voice harsh. "You stay with the regiment." Varro did not answer. He could not. Something held him frozen, not fear, not obedience, not compulsion. Understanding, he knew without knowing how. This was the moment Elthera had seen, not a battle, a choice. Isel's hand tightened, fingers trembling now. "Varro, don't go, please." He met her eyes. Her fear was not for the regiment. It was for him. And in that, there was something dangerous, something human, something fragile. He turned, slowly, to face her fully. "I have to." He did not say why. He did not know the words. The scorpions waited, silent and patient as death. Varro stepped forward. One step, then another. He moved toward the assassins who should have killed him, and they moved aside to let him pass. The world beyond the regiment fell away with every step Varro took. The sound of his boots on shattered stone echoed too loudly in his ears, as though the air itself had changed density. The striking scorpions did not guide him with words. They did not touch him. They simply moved, silent as thought, maintaining a formation that allowed him to walk among them without ever being invited, and without ever being able to escape. Their presence was suffocating, not because of their bodies, but because of what they represented. Every motion was precise, not a gesture wasted. Predators that did not need to snarl or stalk to terrify. They existed in the absolute certainty of their superiority. They had killed more humans than Varro could conceive. They had survived wars older than his bloodline. And still, they watched him not with contempt, but with the unsettling attention of scholars dissecting meaning. They led him through the station ruins, past collapsed platforms and cracked ferrocrete pillars bent into forms like broken limbs. They ascended a sloped incline where daylight spilled through the ragged frame of what had once been the station's vaulted glass roof. The light caught motes of ash suspended in the air, turning them into glimmering particles that drifted like lost souls. Varro felt the world narrowing to a point, everything pulling toward a single inevitability. They stopped near an overturned transit hauler, its chassis half melted and fused to the ground by plasma fire. The lead scorpion stepped aside, so she could step forward. The Warseer, Elthara. Varro did not know her name, but he knew her. Not from memory, not from sight, but from the pressure behind his thoughts, the gentle presence that had walked beside him without ever appearing. The wraithbone armor she wore did not gleam, it breathed, soft, pale, flowing like polished ivory shaped to the contours of a being who had never needed to rush. Her helm was crowned with sweeping backward arcs like the petals of an ancient flower. The air around her carried the faintest sound, like glass wind chimes resonating at the edge of hearing. She regarded him as one might regard a star glimpsed through distance, something small in the sky, yet old and perhaps dangerous. Varro's pulse steadied. "Why me?" he said. The Warseer did not answer immediately. She did not need to form words to speak. The silence between them was thick, not oppressive but full. A waiting moment, a held breath in the story of two species. When she finally spoke, the words were soft, but they carried weight. "Not you," she said. "What follows you?" He felt the blade at his side like a heartbeat. Varro swallowed. "I didn't ask for this." The Warseer inclined her head, just slightly. No one asks for threads they do not see being woven. Her voice was neither cold nor warm, it was simply true. Varro stepped forward. The scorpion shifted, but not to stop him, to observe. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. The Warseer's gaze did not waver. "You walk," she said. "You choose, and others will follow your choices, some knowingly, some not." Varro felt the ground tilt. "I'm just a soldier." "No," the Warseer replied. And for the first time, her tone changed, barely, a faint shadow of something like sorrow. "You are a point of inflection." The words hit like impact. He remembered the masked figure, the whisper, the blade that had not been abandoned but given. He felt the truth. He was not chosen for greatness. He was chosen because he could be moved, flexible, influence spreads fastest through the ordinary. Varro's voice was barely a whisper. What if I choose wrong? The Warseer stepped closer. The air around her shimmered, not with heat but with presence. Then you will do what every species in this galaxy does, she said. You will bleed, and we will bleed, and the stars will continue turning. Not comfort, truth. Her hand lifted, not to touch him. She would never break the boundary, but to indicate the horizon behind him. Your regiment still lives because you live. They will leave this city alive if you return to them. If you do not, they will die within the day. The words struck him like a physical blow. This was not destiny, this was responsibility. Varro's breath faltered. So I go back. Yes, she said. And you? He asked. She did not look away. We continue watching. The Scorpions moved as one, shifting formation, preparing to withdraw. The Warseer inclined her head, not respect, not acknowledgement, simply completion. Then she turned. In the span of a blink, they were gone. Varro stood alone. The blade at his side was no longer silent. It felt like a pulse. His pulse. He turned toward the regiment. He walked. Not because he understood, not because he trusted, but because now he knew he was being watched, and because he could no longer pretend he was just another soldier. Varro's return to the regiment did not begin with words. It began with silence, the kind that forms not from peace, but from a question that no one is certain they want answered. The other soldiers saw him long before he reached them. They had not moved from the transit platform. They had held formation, weapons trembling in hands that had been steady through bombardment, siege, starvation, and slaughter. But this was different. This was not a threat they could fight. It was something they had only ever been taught to fear, the unknown within one of their own. Ellen stepped forward first. His visor was raised now, exposing the face of a man carved from endurance, jaw tense, eyes dark, the lines of too many losses etched deep. He did not speak. He simply searched Varro's face as though he were looking for a wound he could not tend with bandages or Medikey gel. Behind him, Ress clutched her rifle with both hands, knuckles white. Cole stood still as stone. And Isel reached for him without realizing she did, her hand hovering in the space between them, as if unsure whether he would fracture or fade at her touch. Varro stopped in front of them. No one asked what had happened. No one wanted to know. He could feel the blade hidden beneath his flak vest, a cold line against his ribs, phantom light but undeniably present. Had they seen it? Possibly. Had they guessed? Likely. Did any of them speak? No, because they were already balancing on the knife's edge of despair, and some truths had the power to cut deeper than any wound. Ellen broke the silence first. Are they coming back? His voice was low, stripped of authority and armor and inevitability. Varro shook his head. No. That's a mercy, Ress breathed, but her voice was unsteady, as though she didn't quite believe it. Isel's gaze lingered on Varro, eyes soft, searching, but she did not ask the question on her tongue. Instead, she said just one word. You're still you. Varro wanted to say yes. He wanted to say that nothing had changed, that he was still the same soldier, the same man who had entered this war believing there were only orders and survival. But the words would not form. He could not lie, not to her, not to Ellen, not to himself. Instead, he managed, I'm still here. It was the truth, and it was enough for now. Ellen gave a single nod, curt and decisive. Then we move. The regiment set out again, further north toward the trenchworks that separated the Manufactorum district from the outer defense ring. The cityscape changed as they walked. Ruins becoming bones, becoming dust. Buildings no longer stood, they leaned, sagged, collapsed inward like tired bodies. Smoke hung low. The ash underfoot had grown deeper, soft, shifting, as though the ground itself were being erased grain by grain. Varro moved at the center of the column, not by choice but by unspoken consensus. The others seemed to orbit him now, watching without staring, reacting without speaking. He was no leader, no symbol, just a focal point, gravity pulling without effort or intention. Above them, the sky roared, not thunder, but engines, war engines. The sound hit the chest more than the ear, a resonant tremor that turned breath shallow. A Titan's silhouette emerged over the horizon, vast and cathedral-framed, striding through the smoke like a god wrought in steel and prayer. The ground quivered beneath each footfall. Its carapace was adorned with golden iconography, its weapons arrays humming with stored destructive power. The Imperium had come, but hope did not follow in its wake. For every Titan was a beacon, and every beacon drew predators. A shape slithered into view behind it, not in body, but in shadow. A pulse in the air, a shift in the atmosphere, a presence like cold fingers slipping beneath armor and skin. Varro felt it before the others. Not Eldar, not Imperial, not anything that belonged to flesh. His pulse stilled. Iselle noticed his stillness before she noticed the sky. Her eyes widened. Ellen followed her gaze. The light dimmed, just faintly, just enough to stain the world's color. Varro heard the whisper, not in words, not in language, but in the bones of his teeth. "You are seen." He staggered, the blade at his side warmed, not heat, recognition. Something in the skein had shifted. Something that had been waiting had now arrived. The Titan took another step. The shadow followed, and the air trembled with the first hint of a storm that was not weather. Varro exhaled. Something is coming. The others heard him, and they believed him. The Titan's silhouette loomed larger with each step, a monolithic altar of steel and sanctioned wrath. Its footfall sent dull shocks through the earth, rattling broken masonry and loose cartridges on the ground. Its carapace bore the sigils of the Collegia Titanica, though soot and battle scoring obscured much of the heraldry. It moved as though exhausted, not in motion but in spirit, like a god forced to walk among mortals when it would rather sleep beneath monuments and hymns. The regiment stopped, not because Ellen ordered it, but because the world itself demanded stillness. Awe was not reverence. Awe was the recognition of scale, of one's own smallness in the face of something impossibly vast. Even veterans who had seen death in every shape stilled in the Titan's shadow. But the dread that moved through the ranks did not come from the machine. It came from the thing behind it. The space near the Titan's trailing stride shimmered. Faint at first, like heat haze, then stronger. A distortion that did not bend light so much as memory, as if the eye had been taught what should exist there and was now being instructed to forget. Varro felt his breath slow, not by choice, by pressure, a presence, hungry only in the way a storm is hungry. Not chaos, not warp-spawned, not demonic, older, quieter. The air grew cold, not in temperature but sensation, the kind that raises hairs and hollows breath. The ash that drifted through the air stilled, as if the world feared to move in its presence. Varro was not looking at it with eyes. He was feeling it through something, deeper, someplace he had never known existed. Iselle whispered, "Emperor, protect us." But the prayer was thin, not disbelief, just small. Ellen did not break, he did not kneel, he did not speak faith into the air. He simply placed himself between Varro and the unseen presence, as if instinct alone demanded that action, even if it was meaningless. Varro stepped forward, not to hide, but because something had shifted within him and did not allow retreat. The blade at his side had grown warm, pulsing not in time with his heartbeat, but beside it, parallel, as though something within it recognized the presence approaching. The shimmering distortion resolved, not into shape, not into form, but into suggestion. A silhouette without edges, a being not meant to be perceived linearly, the kind of presence one encounters only in myth or death or visions meant to break the mind. It watched, not Varro's body. Varro, the core of him. Varro felt his mind strain at the edges, not with pain, but with the weight of being perceived by something that did not measure existence the way mortals did. In the corner of his vision, a flicker, movement on the rooftops. Not human, not chaos, not machine. A harlequin, watching, not intervening, not performing, bearing witness. The masked figure from before. The one who had spoken not with voice, but with intention. Varro understood, with a clarity that felt sharpened from inside. The Eldar were not guiding him, they were guarding the space around him. From whatever now watched him with the patience of eternity. Ellen's hand tightened on his rifle. Varro, we leave, now, slowly, eyes down. Varro did not look away, because he understood something deeper than language. The presence did not want his death. It wanted to see what he would become. The realization did not feel empowering. It felt like being placed on a scale. Measured, weighed, not yet judged. The presence withdrew, not by fading, but by closing some invisible aperture as though a great eye had blinked shut. The ash fell again. The world exhaled. The Titan continued its march, unaware it had been escorting something beyond human comprehension. The regiment stood in silence for a long time. No one spoke. No one could. Finally, Ellen drew a slow breath and said, voice raw, "We keep moving." No one argued. Iselle walked beside Varro, close but not touching. Her eyes had changed, not with fear, but with the terrible understanding that some truths cannot be carried alone. Varro did not speak, because now he knew with absolute certainty. Whatever path he walked now was no longer a path of survival. It was a path of consequence, and every step was being watched. The webway was not silent. To those without the soul sight, it might appear still and dead, a labyrinth of crystal corridors suspended in a void that did not obey stars or gravity. But to the Eldar who walked its ancient arteries, the webway was alive, whispering, shifting, pulsing with echoes of journeys taken and battles vanished. Sound here did not travel. It resonated, as though every step was remembered by the passage itself. Elthara moved through the vaulted corridor with her warband trailing behind her, their footsteps soft as falling ash. The wraithbone paths curved in impossible arcs, folding distance and direction into a geometry that obeyed memory rather than matter. Soft, pale light pulsed along the walls, illuminating smooth surfaces carved long before any human tongue had formed its first word. She did not walk quickly. There was no haste here. The webway was a place of precision. To rush was to invite the labyrinth to shift around you, and many who had rushed had been lost to corridors that led nowhere, or worse, everywhere at once. Around her, the runes she carried drifted in slow orbit. Shards of the skein translated into matter. Each one glowed with soft luminescence, but now that light was dim, like stars seen from the depths of deep water. The skein was tightening. Futures that had once branched like flowering gardens were collapsing inward, forming a narrow passage whose end was still obscured. The Harlequin walked beside her, silent now. Gone was the ease, the playful tilt of the head, the theatrical cadence. Their mask remained unchanged, but the air around them felt solemn, almost reverent. When the dance becomes tragedy, the mask does not laugh. "This path has grown thin," the Harlequin said at last, their voice quiet, low enough that it blended with the webway's murmur. "The skein pulls taut. Even the laughing god whispers carefully here." Elthara did not break stride. "I know. You guide the humans still," the Harlequin continued, though it was not accusation. "Even if you no longer move your hand, your intention remains a shape within him." Elthara's voice was steady, but the stillness beneath it was not peace. "I do not guide him. I prepare the world around him so that his steps do not fall into void." The Harlequin tilted their head. "Ah, so you are not the sculptor, you are the floor." Elthara stopped. The webway hummed. She turned to face the Harlequin fully. "He must not be shaped. If he is shaped, the line breaks. And yet he carries your gift." Elthara's fingers curled at her side, not in anger, but in recognition of inevitable truth. "The blade was not guidance," she said. "It was acknowledgement." The Harlequin studied her. "Of what?" "That he now walks where we cannot." The webway dimmed. Not the light, but the air, as if memory itself held its breath. In the mortal realm, Varro walked through war. Here, Elthara walked through meaning. The Maik Harlequin took a slow step, cloak rippling like ink in water. "There are whispers among the masks. Some say you gamble with the fate of your craft world. Others say you gamble with the fate of every craft world." Elthara resumed walking. "Both are correct. And your counsel? They will decide to stop me soon." The Harlequin's voice softened. Not pity, but understanding born of centuries of tragedy repeated in endless variation. "And will you allow them?" "No." The Harlequin's steps matched hers once more. "You know what the path is, then?" "Yes," Elthara said. "I walk it anyway." The webway opened into a wide chamber, an atrium of impossible scale, wraithbone arches curving into a ceiling so distant that it blurred like the horizon of a planet seen from orbit. In the center stood a single structure, a gate, closed, dormant, wrapped in residual skein light like dew on crystal. Beyond this gate lay the world Varro walked. Elthara approached, placing her palm on the smooth surface. The webway gate pulsed faintly in response. Recognition, memory, kinship. But it did not open, because this time she would not step through. Her voice was nearly a whisper when she spoke again. "He must walk without my shadow now. If I follow any further, I become the force that shapes him." "And if he falls?" the Harlequin asked. Elthara did not look away from the gate. "Then we fall." The Harlequin's mask reflected her perfectly. Not warrior, not seer, not savior, burden bearer. The webway pulsed. Far away, on the ash-choked world, Varro drew breath. The threads tightened. The galaxy listened. The gate before Elthara pulsed with faint resonance, the low, soft hum like the sigh of something ancient remembering itself. She held her hand there a moment longer, not touching the smooth wraithbone surface, but hovering just close enough that the structure recognized her presence, an acknowledgement between architect and survivor. The webway did not obey commands. It responded to purpose. And her purpose now was restraint. Her warband waited several paces back, each of them statues carved from poise and ritual discipline. Warriors of Lumthar, sworn not to glory or conquest, but to the preservation of what remained of their people. They had followed her into battles they could not win, negotiations they could not trust, and futures they could not see. But this was different. This was waiting. And waiting was its own kind of suffering. One among them, a warlock named Sarath, stepped forward, stopping beside her but not daring to match her distance from the gate. "You sever the thread now," Sarath said quietly. Not doubt, simply observation. "I loosen it," Elthara replied. "If I sever it, the skein shatters. If I hold it, it strangles him. I must do neither." Sarath exhaled slowly. The breath trembled, barely perceptible. "We place our fate, then, in a human's hands." "No," Elthara said. "We place it in the path he chooses. The difference is everything." Sarath nodded, though uncertainty did not fade from her eyes. "The Council will demand answers. They will receive them," Elthara said. "But not yet. Their sight is clouded by fear. Fear narrows futures." "And yours?" Sarath asked. "My fear is old," Elthara answered. "I learned long ago how to see through it." The Harlequin listened, silent, poised as though waiting for a cue in a performance whose next act had not yet been revealed. Their mask reflected no emotion, yet Elthara felt the question radiating from them. Why him? Why this thread? Why now? She did not turn toward them, but she answered. "Because humanity bends," she said. "They do not break easily, even when they should. They find paths through ruin not by clarity but persistence. That is what the skein requires now. Not brilliance, not purity, not prophecy, endurance." The Harlequin spoke softly. The timbre of a flute played at the edge of grief. "And what of him specifically? Countless humans endure. Why this one?" Elthara closed her eyes, and for the first time, the answer hurt. "Because he listens," she whispered. "Not to us, not to gods, to the world, to suffering, to others, and because he has not yet decided what he is willing to become." The webway dimmed around them, not in light, but in mood, as though the entire structure mourned that simple truth. The most dangerous beings in the galaxy were not tyrants or saints or visionaries. They were the ones standing at the threshold of decision. A warrior certain of their righteousness is predictable. A monster convinced of their nature is limited, but a human who has not yet chosen is infinite. The Harlequin bowed their head in a gesture so subtle it might have been meant for the webway itself. "Then the mask watches," they said, "and we wait with breath held." Elthara felt the blade of that patience. Harlequins did not wait, they moved, they acted. They danced the tragedies of past and future. But this time, even they held still. Sarath looked once more toward the dormant gate. "If he falters, he will," Elthara said. "All mortals falter. The skein is not built of perfect steps, it is built of recovery." Outside the webway, the planet burned on. A regiment marched, a man carried a blade he did not understand, and a presence older than language itself watched. Elthara stepped back from the gate, not closing it, not opening it, simply letting it be. "Come," she said. "The skein does not end here, it bends." They turned as one, leaving the gate behind them, the pulse of its slumbering light fading into the distance as they walked deeper into the webway's endless lattice of memory and possibility. The Harlequin lingered one moment longer, mask gleaming faintly in the pale light. Then they followed. The webway whispered. The skein tightened. The next thread would be pulled far from here. The webway widened into a corridor whose architecture shifted as they moved, the walls reshaping themselves in slow pulses like the lungs of a slumbering giant. Light rippled through the wraithbone in soft gradients, pale gold to cold ivory to the faintest shade of blue, mirroring emotional resonance instead of any sun. Elthara's steps were deliberate, measured, dictated not by the destination but by what she carried inside. This path had been walked before, not by her, but by those she remembered. The echo of their presence lay in the structure itself, in the subtle grooves of the wraithbone, in the texture of the floor where weary hands had once pressed against it. Entire generations of warseers had paced these halls, haunted by futures that slipped like sand through clenched hands. The webway remembered them, and Elthara could feel the weight of that remembrance now, a chorus of quiet desperation that had never stopped reverberating. Sarath broke the silence. The Harlequin has not asked their true question. The Harlequin did not deny it, they simply tilted their head. Elthara continued walking. Ask it. The Harlequin's voice came like fabric being pulled taut, soft but bearing tension. What becomes of him if he sees us, truly sees us, not as saints, not as monsters, not as myth, but as we are? Elthara slowed. This was the question. Not destiny, not fate, not consequence, understanding. She spoke carefully. Then he will grieve. Sarath looked at her sharply. Grieve? Yes, Elthara said, because he will understand that we are not gods, not saviors, not demons, only a people dying slowly and beautifully, clinging to memory like a lifeline. And he will understand that he too is dying, and that will break him. The Harlequin's mask glimmered with something like sorrow. And if he breaks, Elthara's voice was quiet, then he becomes like all who break, dangerous to everyone. The warband absorbed this in silence. It was not a threat, it was a truth the Eldar had learned long before the fall. The webway curved downward, opening into a vast atrium lined with towering wraithbone statues. Not heroes, not leaders, not warriors, seers, but not in triumph. They were depicted bowed, heads lowered, hands extended toward something unseen, something absent. The statues did not honor them, they mourned them. Elthara stopped before the largest of them, a towering sculpture of a seer whose face had been carved into an expression of exquisite exhaustion. The robes flowed like liquid stone, and the hands were open, palms facing outward, not an offering, but surrender. Sarath looked away. The Harlequin lowered their head. Elthara stepped close to the statue and placed her hand against its open palm. It was warm, the warmth of memory, of those who had suffered the skein before her. Those who walked before me, Elthara murmured, believed they could align futures through force of will alone. They believed the skein was a tapestry they could weave. And were they wrong? Sarath asked. They were incomplete, Elthara said. The skein is not a tapestry, it is a conversation. Between choice and consequence, between desire and cost, between hope and despair. She withdrew her hand. The warmth did not follow. One cannot command the skein, she said. One can only listen to it, guide where guidance is allowed, release where release is demanded. The Harlequin turned their mask toward her. And now you release him. Yes, Elthara said. Now I release him. The silence that followed felt heavier than grief, because this was not letting go in trust. This was letting go knowing she might have to watch him fall. We do not intervene further, Elthara said. Not with blade, not with vision, not with word, we watch and we wait. Sarath nodded. The Harlequin bowed deeply, not as performer, not as messenger, but as witness. The warband turned to leave the atrium. Before they did, Elthara cast one last look at the bowed statue, at the hands that surrendered, at the lesson carved into stone, that a seer must know when to stop shaping fate. She did not know if she had learned it soon enough, but she had learned it. The webway dimmed, and the chamber folded away behind them. Far beyond its walls, on a world drowned in ash and hunger, Vero took another step, not guided, not protected, not observed by gentle hand, but seen. The skein tightened, and the galaxy waited. The webway narrowed into a corridor of sharper angles, its smooth curves giving way to precise edges, as though the structure itself had begun to think in rigid lines. The hum of the infinity lattice deepened, resonating through the warband's bones like a distant drum. Elthara recognized this shift. They were approaching a nexus, a place where travel paths converged across vast reaches of space and time, where decisions whispered into the skein echoed louder than they should. The Harlequin slowed slightly, their movement subtle, almost imperceptible. But to Elthara it was a signal. Even they moved with care here. This was a crossroads in the purest sense, not of place, but of significance. What one chose to believe here would shape how one walked forward. Serath's steps hesitated, not fear, not uncertainty, reverence. Elthara knew what she was feeling. The presence of those who had walked these corridors before them hung thick in the air, not ghosts, not spirits, but the imprint of their wills, their agony, their hope. Every warseer who had ever tried to guide fate had passed through here. Every one of them had stood where Elthara stood now, and every one of them had reached the same question. How do you save what does not want to be saved? Serath spoke first. If the council moves against you, if they recall your warband, if they exile you, they will, Elthara said gently. Serath swallowed. Then why continue? Elthara did not slow. Because the skein has already begun to bend. If I stop now, the bend snaps into fracture. And if you continue? Elthara looked ahead, not at the webway path, but through it, through the veil between now and what might be. Then we may survive. The Harlequin gave a soft, almost inaudible laugh. Not mockery, recognition. Ah, the Eldar still chase survival as though it were salvation. Elthara glanced toward them. And you do not? The Harlequin tilted their head, the silver tear on their mask glimmering. We chase meaning. Survival is merely the stage on which meaning may be found. Elthara absorbed this, then nodded. Then we walk different paths toward the same cliff. The Harlequin bowed deeply, not in agreement but acknowledgement. Ahead, the corridor widened again, opening onto a circular chamber suspended over nothing. The floor was a web of wraithbone filaments, delicate and pale, as though spun from the bones of stars. Beneath it was void, not darkness, but lack. A silence so absolute that it did not feel empty, but waiting. The warband halted at the threshold. Elthara stepped forward onto the lattice. The webway did not shift, did not tremble. It accepted her weight as though she had always been meant to stand here. This was the place, where the skein could be heard most clearly, not as vision, not as prophecy, but as song. The runes that orbited her brightened, slowly, carefully, like petals unfurling beneath warm water. Elthara closed her eyes, and she listened, not to futures, not to warnings, not to the weight of possibility, but to a single thread weaving its way through chaos. Varro. His breath in the cold air of the ruined city, the glint of ash falling through fractured sunlight, the blade resting at his side, waiting for the moment its purpose became known. The presence watching him. Not Eldar, not warp. Something older. Something quiet, something that learned. Varro did not know he was shaping fate. He did not know that each decision he made now radiated outward like ripples across glass. He only knew exhaustion, pain, fear, and the strange, unwelcome warmth of being seen. The webway song trembled. Elthara opened her eyes. Serath waited, tense. The Harlequin leaned forward, breath held. Elthara spoke. He has not broken. It was not victory. It was not reassurance. It was a fragile moment of truth. A single heartbeat in which collapse had not yet begun. Serath exhaled in relief that was too quick. The Harlequin did not move. Elthara's voice did not change. But something has begun watching him more directly. Its attention sharpens. If he falters now, it will claim the moment. Serath stiffened. Then we should return. Intervene. No, Elthara said. This is where the skein requires stillness. If we step forward now, we become the force that shapes him. And then the future collapses into our hands, and our hands are no longer strong enough to hold it. Silence. Not agreement, but understanding. The Harlequin bowed, slowly, deeply. He walks alone now. Elthara closed her eyes once more. Yes. The webway did not speak in language, but every corridor held memory, and memory was heavier here. Elthara stepped back from the lattice bridge, the warband watching her with quiet discipline, though the weight in the air had shifted. Before, there had been purpose. Now, there was inevitability. The Harlequin lingered just ahead of the others, mask angled toward her, expression unreadable by design. Yet something in that posture felt gentler now, like a performer setting down their role long enough to breathe. They approached slowly, every movement a careful note in a silent song. "You fear him," the Harlequin said. Elthara did not deny it. "Yes? Do you fear his failure or his success?" Elthara's jaw tightened, but not in frustration. "I fear the scale of what he will be forced to choose. I fear that the galaxy demands greatness only of those who have no desire to hold it." The Harlequin made a soft sound, neither laugh nor sigh. "Then we share fear." Warlocks and warriors exchanged glances, not because they understood, but because they recognized the rare gravity of admission. Eldar did not speak fear aloud. To acknowledge it was to form its shape, and shaped things could cut. Serath approached, her hand resting near the hilt of her singing spear, not as a threat but grounding. "What comes next for us?" Elthara looked to the webway paths branching outward from the chamber, each one aligned to a different world, a different conflict, a different thread of survival. Some led to craft worlds still adrift. Some led to orc warfronts. Some led to silence where no life remained to remember. None led back. "We move to the Gate of Fallen Moons," Elthara said. "From there, we will reposition, observe, prepare." Serath bowed her head. Acceptance, not agreement, not faith, but acceptance. The warband turned, beginning their slow march toward the narrowing passage ahead. Only the Harlequin stayed at Elthara's side. Their voice was quieter now, as though no performance remained between them. "You understand what it means to release him? Yes? That if he rises without us? Yes. If he falls alone." Elthara did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely above breath. "No one falls alone." That was the oldest tragedy of the Eldar, and the most human truth. The Harlequin bowed their head, a true bow this time, not theatrical. Then they stepped away, following the others into the corridor. Elthara remained a moment longer, standing at the center of the quiet chamber, surrounded by the faint resonance of futures unchosen. She felt the echo of countless decisions layered into the wraithbone. Farseers who had walked here before her, wrestled with the same burden, lifted their hands in surrender or defiance, and still the galaxy had bled on. There were no correct answers, only the least devastating. She turned to follow her warband. As she walked, the webway dimmed behind her, sealing its echo, leaving only the faintest whisper in her mind. The human is changing. But not into what? Not yet. Far away, in the shattered husk of the city, Varro stopped mid-stride, breath catching. The air tasted metallic, as though lightning had struck the ground somewhere unseen. Isel, walking beside him, felt the shift but did not understand it. Ellen's hand tightened on his rifle. Ress looked to the sky as though expecting it to fracture. None of them knew why. Varro did. He did not know what had changed. But something had stopped holding him. Something had let go. The presence that had walked beside him, not guiding, not forcing, only watching, had stepped back. And now the world felt wider. He exhaled slowly. The blade at his side no longer pulsed. It waited. Not as a gift, not as a burden, as a question. The skein tightened, the storm approached. The final thread waited to be pulled. The city had stopped pretending it was alive. What little wind remained moved only ash, and the sky above had settled into a permanent bruise of dusk, a horizon soaked in gray and violet smoke, where the sun no longer bothered to assert itself. The 117th marched along what had once been a transit arterial, though the markings had been eaten away by bombardment and acid rain. The buildings on either side stood like hollow ribs around a corpse, their windows blackened or staring open like sockets. Varro walked at the front now, not because he had been ordered to, and not because he demanded it. The others had simply fallen behind him, step by step, until his presence became a point of orientation. Even Ellen did not question it. Command no longer mattered. Ranks were relics. Survival was the only structure left, and the regiment had begun to shape itself around Varro the way a wounded body forms scar tissue, instinctively, without decision. The blade rested against his side under his flak vest. It made no sound, it carried no warmth, it waited. And Varro understood now why its silence did not frighten him. It was not a promise of power, it was a reminder of choice. The presence that had once pressed faintly at the back of his thoughts had pulled away, leaving an absence like a held breath. For the first time, Varro felt the shape of his own mind without the subtle weight of being observed. He had not realized until now how much of himself had been bracing against that unseen attention. Without it, the world felt both lighter and immeasurably heavier. Iselle walked beside him. She did not speak. She did not touch him. But she looked at him with the steady gaze of someone who refused to let fear define understanding. Her silence was not distance, it was trust. And trust, in a world built on death, was a gift more dangerous than any weapon. Ellen halted the column at the base of a shattered underpass, raising a clenched fist. The regiment crouched without needing instruction. It was muscle memory now, the last functioning fragment of training that had not been eroded by exhaustion. The air was too quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet before hunger made itself known. Ress scanned the perimeter. Her voice was tight. Movement, North Ridge, hard to tell the size. Carl adjusted his scope. Not human, too fast, too many. Ellen exhaled. Tyranids. The word fell with a weight that sucked heat from the air. The Tyranids did not conquer, they consumed. Varro felt the world tilt, not fear, not dread, but the terrible clarity that comes when death is unavoidable. The presence that had watched him before might have withdrawn, but echoes remained. Something deep beneath memory stirred, aligning his awareness not to survival, but to scale. "This city will not hold," Varro said. Ellen looked at him sharply, not in challenge, in recognition. "No," Ellen agreed, "it won't." Iselle's breath caught. "Then we retreat to the outer lines?" "No lines remain," Ress murmured. "Everything east of the manufacturum districts is gone." Silence. There were only two choices now: hold ground and die slowly, or run and be overtaken. But Varro saw a third path, not in strategy, not in vision, but in the simple fact of who they still were. "We move toward the skyward relay tower," he said. Ellen froze. That tower collapsed cycles ago. "Not entirely," Varro said. "The substructure is intact. If we reach it, we can signal the orbital command remnants. We won't be extracted, but we will be seen." Ress frowned. "Seen by who? The fleet is broken." Varro looked past her, to the horizon, where the silhouette of the Titan strode still, its form growing smaller in the haze. "Seen by anyone still listening." Isel's voice was quiet. "It's enough." No one argued, not because the plan made sense, but because there was nowhere else to place hope that did not taste like surrender. The regiment moved. They crossed the underpass, boots whispering over fractured concrete. The air vibrated now, not sound, but pressure, the subtle warping of the world that came when something hungry moved in large enough numbers to shake ground and thought alike. The Tyranids were coming. Varro could feel them. Not through sight, not through sound, through inevitability. He rested one hand lightly against the hilt of the blade. Not to draw it. Not yet. Only to remember that choices were not made when one stood. Choices were made when one refused to run alone. He looked to Ellen, to Isel, to Ress and Kale, to the regiment behind him. "Keep moving," he said. And they did. Into the ash, into the waiting dark, into the place where future would be decided by what a single life chose to become. The sky did not brighten as they moved. If anything, the light thinned, as though the sun had grown weary of watching this world die, and now merely lingered out of obligation. The air tasted of iron and something sweet, like meat left to rot under a broken sun. The regiment moved quickly but not frantically. Panic was a luxury they had already burned out of themselves. The terrain sloped upward toward the old relay tower. Once, it had been a proud spear of adamantine and ceramite rising over the city, its auspex arrays gleaming like facets of a crown. Now, it leaned like a wounded animal, half collapsed, cables hanging in dark tangles, its upper spires broken into jagged silhouettes. If there had ever been a heartbeat of civilization here, this had been where it pulsed loudest. Now it was a ruin that held memory and defeat. Varro did not look at the tower itself. He looked at the ground, at the way rubble had been displaced, at the way ash had been disturbed, at the faint sheen of acid-scored craters, tracks, movement, not long ago. "They passed this way," Varro said. Ress nodded grimly. "Broodlings, scouting, feeling for warm bodies." Isel's voice was low. "They know we're here." "No," Varro corrected quietly. "They feel us. They don't think. They hunger, and hunger knows everything." The regiment pressed on. Each step took effort now, not from fatigue, though fatigue was a constant, but from the sense of being approached. The ground did not tremble yet, the air did not vibrate, but the certainty of pursuit grew in their bones, joint by joint, breath by breath. Ellen moved beside Varro. "You speak like you fought them before." Varro did not raise his eyes. "No." Ellen waited. Varro continued. "But I understand what it means to be hunted by something that does not hate you. Something that sees you only as heat and movement. Something to be unmade." Ellen nodded once. "Then you know the only thing that matters is how long we can stay ahead." Varro said nothing, but he understood. Time was the battlefield now. They climbed the incline toward the relay tower. The wind picked up, thin, biting, carrying the faintest chittering echo. Not sound, pressure, instinct. A primal recognition that the world was preparing to collapse into violence. Cole stopped suddenly, raising a fist. The regiment froze. He adjusted his scope. Then he spoke, very quietly. "Contact." The word did not ripple. It sank. At the top of the slope, partially shrouded by the leaning wreckage of the tower, A shape waited. It moved with a slow, fluid economy that made its size impossible to guess. Chitin glimmered in the dim haze, pale where acid had etched, dark where blood had dried. Eyes, not eyes but the suggestion of awareness in black, glossy pits, fixed on the regiment. A Tyranid warrior, not charging, watching. Waiting for the rest of the swarm to close the distance. It did not see them as threat, only as time. Ellen exhaled. We cannot engage. If we fire now, we draw the brood. Varro did not answer him, because the blade at his side was warm. Not pulsing, not calling, simply warm, as though responding to the pressure of something vast moving just beyond the edge of perception. Choice is not offered. Choice is recognized. Varro stepped forward. Ellen's hand shot out and gripped his forearm. No, we move together. We do not die buying time. Varro looked at him, not defiant, not stubborn, not possessed by something beyond himself. Clear. We do not run, Varro said, because if we run while they are watching, we are already dead. Silence. Ash drifted. The Tyranid warrior shifted one step, its body low, predatory, patient. Isel spoke very softly. Varro, tell me you're not walking toward it. I am, he said. Her breath trembled, but she did not stop him. Because she understood too. If they ran, the brood would fall on them while they fled. If they stood together, they would break under the sheer mass of what was coming. But if one moved first, if one forced the swarm to react instead of pursue, there was a chance. Varro walked forward. One step, then another. The blade remained sheathed. He did not need to draw it yet. Drawing it was not what signaled choice. Walking toward the monster was. Behind him, the regiment did not call out, did not plead, did not break. They simply watched. And for the first time, Varro did not feel small. He felt equal. Not to the Tyranid, but to the moment. The warrior lowered itself, muscles coiling, mandibles flaring. Varro stopped 3 paces from it, close enough to die, far enough to decide. His hand rested on the blade's hilt, not to draw, but to declare. He breathed in ash. He exhaled fear. He stood. The Tyranid hissed. The world held its breath. The Tyranid warrior moved first. It did not lunge. It did not roar. It simply shifted its weight. A slow, sinuous motion that drew its limbs beneath its body, the way a serpent coils before striking. Its movements were quiet, controlled, measured. A predator confident enough to savor inevitability. Varro did not draw. He did not flinch. He simply lowered his center of gravity and let his breath settle into something steady. The ash in the air thickened and swirled between them, catching against chitin and cloth alike. For a moment, the world narrowed to 2 silhouettes facing one another in a wasteland without past or future. Behind him, Ellen lifted his weapon but did not fire. Isel's fingers tightened around the strap of her medical kit. Ress and Kale exchanged a single glance, an acknowledgement of the silent decision they already understood. If Varro moved, they would move. If he fell, they would fall trying to reach him. The Tyranid warrior's head tilted, its mandibles clicking softly. There was no hatred in that sound, no malice, only recognition of warm flesh. It began to circle, not to intimidate, but to evaluate angles. Tyranids learned, they adapted, they executed. This one had seen humans before. It expected the same mistakes. Varro shifted one foot, slow enough to not signal panic, direct enough to signal readiness. The warrior stilled, then it moved, fast, faster than thought. A blur of chitin and blade limbs cutting through ash. Varro stepped aside rather than backward, his body moving before the blade moved. The Tyranid's strike cut air where his ribs had been an instant earlier, the wind of its motion hot and sharp. Only then did Varro draw. The sound was not a whisper or a scream. It was the single clean note of metal clearing a sheath, the kind of sound that carries memory. The blade flickered in the dim light. No glow, no aura, only steel honed beyond ornament or vanity. The warrior struck again. This time, Varro met it. Not with force. Force would have shattered him. With angle, the blade intercepted the chitinous scythe, sliding along its curve and turning its momentum aside. The shock traveled through Varro's bones, but he did not lose his stance. He pivoted, let the energy pass through him, exhaled slow, and stepped in rather than back. The warrior hissed, surprise, not pain. The regiment watched in a silence so taut it could have cut stone. Isel's lips parted. Ellen leaned forward as though one word might break the balance. Ress had stopped breathing entirely. Varro could feel the world thinning around him. Not fading, but sharpening. The presence that had once watched him from afar did not return, but something of that attention remained. Not guidance, not protection, awareness. The warrior lunged again. Varro moved, not faster, not harder, cleaner. The blade met chitin at the joint of one limb, where armor thinned for articulation. Not a strike of power, a strike of knowledge. The limb buckled, severed in a spray of pale, glistening ichor. The warrior shrieked, not in pain. Pain meant nothing to it, but in recalculation. It reevaluated this prey. It realized this was not prey. It struck wild. Varro dropped to one knee and let the strike pass over. The scythe blade scraped sparks off the rubble behind him. He rose with a twist of his shoulder and a downward stroke that buried the blade beneath the Tyranid's thorax where its carapace met muscle. No flourish, no brutality, just accuracy. The warrior convulsed once, twice, then fell. Varro drew the blade free and stepped back before it collapsed. The body hit the ground with a sound like wet stone shattering. Silence followed, not reverence, recognition. Varro did not speak. He did not raise the blade. He simply stood there, breath slow, weapon angled downward in respect for the dead, because death deserved acknowledgement even when death was necessary. Ellen approached first, not rushing, not triumphant. He came to stand beside Varro, gazing down at the corpse. That was not luck, Ellen said quietly. No, Varro answered. Isel stepped forward, her voice barely carrying. Did it feel like something took hold? Varro shook his head. No, something let go. Ress scanned the horizon. Then the swarm knows now. Yes, Varro said. Kale's hand trembled on his rifle. They'll come fast. Varro sheathed the blade. We move faster. The regiment did not answer with voices. They answered by moving. Together. Up the slope, toward the leaning tower, toward being seen, toward whatever came next. The climb to the relay tower became a march through a world unraveling by degrees. The ground softened beneath their boots, not from moisture but from the breakdown of once solid structures beneath relentless weathering and the slow digestion of Tyranid spores. The air stung their eyes and cracked their lips. Every breath scraped the throat like inhaling powdered bone. Above them, the relay tower leaned at an angle that defied trust. Cables hung like the desiccated veins of some gutted titan, swaying in the steady wind. Birds no longer nested in its beams. Nothing called from its vast metal hollows. Even memory seemed absent here, as though the tower had been abandoned not just by life, but by time itself. Varro led, not because the others could not, but because no one questioned the shape of his footsteps now. The warrior's death had not changed him. It had revealed something already present. Not greatness, not heroism. Something quieter. Capacity. the capacity to choose. At the base of the tower, they halted. The old access stairway had long since collapsed, leaving only a ragged slope of fractured girders and the skeletal remains of reinforced beams. Rebar jutted from ruined concrete like broken ribs. The ascent would require hands and feet and would leave them exposed. Ellen surveyed the path. We'll be visible on the climb, they'll hit us while we're on it. Ress scanned behind them. Then we don't delay, we move now or not at all. Call adjusted his grip on his rifle. I'll cover rear. Isel simply nodded and tightened the strap of her pack. She did not need to say anything. She had seen enough dying for 10 lives, and she had learned that meaning came in what one moved toward, not what one ran from. They began the ascent. The steel groaned beneath them, shifting like something asleep being disturbed. Varro climbed with practiced caution, eyes fixed not on his hands, but on the path ahead. The higher they climbed, the more the sky expanded, an endless vault of ash-colored air stretching into a horizon without promise or doom. The planet was neither dying nor resisting. It was accepting. Halfway up, Kale froze. Movement! Behind! Not footsteps, not engines, a ripple, a black wave rolling across the ruins below, small forms darting forward on clawed limbs, eyes like glistening beads of hunger. Tyrannid gaunts, and many. Ellen barked, "Keep climbing, do not turn." Shots rang out, sharp cracks lost quickly to the shrill screams rising from below. Cole fired clean, precise, deliberate. Ress took shots only when it mattered. When a gaunt gained too much ground, when momentum threatened collapse. But the swarm was not deterred. Hunger had seen them. Varro did not look down. He climbed faster. Steel buckled under his boot, and his weight pitched forward. Isel caught his arm, not with force, not with desperation, but with certainty. "I've got you," she said. He nodded, breath steady. "And I you." They moved as one. Near the tower's midpoint, the structure widened into a platform once used for maintenance crews. They pulled themselves onto it just as the first wave of gaunts reached the slope below. Ellen spun, rifle raised. Hold position. Short bursts. Gunfire flared, sharp and controlled. Shells clinked and fell, bouncing off beams and vanishing into the void below. The gaunts climbed with horrific grace, their limbs built for this terrain. They moved in silence except for the scrape of claws on metal. Varro drew the blade. It felt different now, not heavier, but known. Ress spoke through clenched teeth as she reloaded. "Varro, how close do we let them get?" "Close enough," he answered. Isel frowned. "Close enough for what?" Varro's eyes remained fixed on the swarm. To make the choice matter. The first gaunt reached them, lunging from below. Varro stepped forward, blade arcing, not flourishing, not striking, answering. Steel met carapace, and the air filled with the sharp, chemical scent of Tyrannid ichor. The swarm surged. The regiment braced, the tower trembled. Varro stood in the center, not as savior, not as sacrifice, but as the pivot around which fate might turn. Not chosen by prophecy, not guided by gods, only chosen by the moment. The kind of moment that changes everything. The swarm hit the platform like a storm given flesh. Not a charge, not a rush, a collapse. A wave folding forward over itself. Claws scraping metal, limbs gripping beams with insect precision. The gaunts came in silence except for the tearing hiss of air displaced by their speed. They moved like a single mind wearing many bodies. The regiment did not break. Ress took position behind a twisted strut and fired in short, practiced bursts. Call worked beside her, his shots tight and efficient, each round a punctuation in the rising roar. Ellen stood at the center of the defensive line, his voice low, steady, directing movement with gestures more than words. Isel moved where the line thinned, knife in one hand, pistol in the other, the quiet grace of someone who had long since made peace with necessity. Varro did not stay with them. He stepped forward, into the place where the swarm was thickest, where the boundary between life and death was not a line but a breath. The blade did not shine, it did not flare, it simply moved, as though it remembered a rhythm that Varro had only just learned to hear. His strikes were not fast, they were precise. He did not hack, he did not carve. He placed the blade where it needed to be, each motion the answer to the question presented before him. A gaunt lunged low. Varro angled his foot and let its momentum carry it past before severing the ridge between thorax and spine. Another leaped, claws spread wide. Varro leaned just enough and bisected its limb at the hinge where armor softened. A third clambered over its dying kin. Varro stopped it with a single forward thrust between its open jaws. The swarm did not falter. Tyranids did not fear, but they adapted. The next wave was faster, more coordinated. Ellen shouted something behind him, but the sound blurred into the clash of bodies and metal. Varro could feel the platform vibrating beneath their feet, not from the swarm, from the tower itself. The entire structure groaned, the metal remembering a time before it had been asked to bear the weight of death. Ress cried out. She fell, shoulder torn, weapon clattering across the platform. Cole reached for her, but a gaunt reached first. Varro did not think. He moved, the blade cut. Cole breathed. Ress rose. Ellen met Varro's eyes for a fragment of a heartbeat, and in that instant there was no rank. No command, no soldier, and no man, only witnesses. The swarm surged again, and the tower shifted. A beam tore loose, crashing down like a falling pillar of rusted bone. The entire platform lurched sideways. Men staggered, ammunition slid across steel, the world tilted. The Tyranids did not slow. Varro felt the platform give under his weight, felt gravity lurch, felt the blade vibrate in his palm, not speaking, not guiding, simply present. Choice is not made in anticipation. Choice is made in the moment one knows what must break so that something else may stand. He looked at the beam that held the swarm's climbing path. He knew. He turned. Ellen understood before Varro spoke. His voice came rough, near broken. Varro, don't. Varro's voice was quiet. Hold them, together. Isel's breath froze. Varro. He was already moving. He sprinted across the platform, shoulders slamming against the weakened support strut. The beam shuddered. The structure groaned, a long, low sound like the planet itself remembering gravity. The gaunts climbing the slope screeched as the path beneath them shifted. Varro drove the blade into the strut. Not to cut, to anchor himself. He put his weight behind it. The beam broke. The platform heaved. The section of the tower holding the climbing swarm tore free, collapsing in a cascade of twisted steel and shrieking chitin. The Tyranids fell, a mass of hunger tumbling into the abyss below, and Varro went with them. He did not fall screaming, he did not fall grasping, he fell like someone stepping through a doorway. The blade remained in his hand. Not glowing, not burning, simply held, the world blurred. Ash rose to meet him. The wind tore his coat into ribbons. Below him, the swarm twisted like a single living wound. Varro closed his eyes, and the last thing he felt was not the presence that once watched him. It was the warmth of the hands that had steadied him when he climbed. The blade did not speak. It simply followed him into the dark. The relay tower stood. The regiment endured. The signal would be sent. Whether anyone would hear it was a question for another day. For now, a choice had been made, and the galaxy shifted to make room for it. End.